My name's Dave Grady. I work at Verizon in the cybersecurity team there. Yesterday, most of you were here yesterday, I assume. Very technical day, had a lot of interesting conversations, and sort of up to here with acronyms and technology. So the fact that you came out to this session today to talk a little bit about some of the soft skill stuff, I really appreciate that. Hopefully a little break from all the technical stuff that's going on here. What I wanted to do is spend a little bit of time talking about the idea of, call it storytelling, but really what I want to talk about is about strategic communication and the roles that you're in and how that's going to help the security program and how that's going to help the overall security culture in your organization. But before I get started, I wanted to mention that this summer I'm celebrating, I don't know, any other space geeks here? People like, I'm celebrating, it's the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing, right? See some hands going up. That was a great documentary on CNN the other day. If you got a chance to watch it, it was excellent. And you think about that speech that Kennedy gave to get everybody behind the idea of going to the moon. Do you remember that stirring speech when he got up and he said, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of creating a federal bureaucracy with 110,000 employees so as to build a 363-foot tall projectile capable of burning 40,000 pounds of solid fuel every second, so as to achieve escape velocity and land on a cold, dead rock 263,000 miles away. You guys remember that speech? No, it was really stirring, wasn't it? Yeah. No, you don't remember that speech because he didn't give that speech. What he said was, I believe this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon safely and returning to the Earth. And he got people excited about that because he kept it simple and he kept it straight and he used natural language, right? So the rocket science that we do in security is important, but to rally your coalition, to get people behind the idea of security ownership, security accountability, you have to focus on the outcomes and not on the process, right? So Kennedy didn't lead with the size of the rocket or the thrust needed to achieve escape velocity. He talked about the simple thing of getting them there and getting them back. And that's what I want you to think about as you, in your roles as security people, security leaders, security team members, when you're communicating and trying to influence people in your organization, focus on the outcomes. So at Verizon, support the sales team there, and I'll spare you all that today, but when we go out and talk to customers, we don't want to lead with everything that we do. And you shouldn't be doing the same thing. The rocket science that you do every day in your job is very important. And these are the things that we do at Verizon. We do everything to enhance visibility of cyber risk. We do all the things necessary to protect the attack surface. We do all the things necessary to detect and respond to cyber attacks. We do all the things that are necessary to minimize impact and to quickly restore operations. And that's what you guys do every day in your jobs, right? But as you try to get business line people, when you try to get the board, when you try to get other stakeholders to support your program and your efforts, it's very easy sometimes to forget who you're talking to, and then you focus on the small print and you focus on all of those things and not on the outcomes. So this is a little bit coaching as a former newspaper guy and as a former communications guy who went into security somehow, to think about yourself not just as a technical, brilliant person that you are, but that you're also a communicator, an influencer, and that you need to be mindful of your audience and the way that you're communicating with them. Communicate strategically. So when we talk about strategic communication, what I really mean is when you are engaging with stakeholders, you're doing it for a specific reason, and you need to be cognizant of that, right? Why are you talking with or presenting to a certain group of people? Is it to influence them to make a decision? Are you trying to make them invest in a program? Are you trying to get more money for your budget? Are you trying to validate or advocate, for changing priorities based on risk? Are you trying to get the businesses to change their processes? Are you trying to get a business line to take more responsibility and be more thoughtful about its loosey-goosey use of technology, or they say, well, we have a market imperative, we've got to get something done by Friday, so we're just going to go off and do our own thing and go around the security controls to change behaviors, right? Why are you communicating with them? So is it to influence? Is it to get more money? Is it to change behaviors of business leaders or even individuals to beyond just the security training that we do every year, right? Click the box, check the box, and move on, but to take some ownership in it. So this is, to me, was really interesting. ISACA is the organization that governs the CISM and the CISA, excuse me, in the system. And I seconded a report a couple of years ago, and these numbers are sort of troubling. You should think about this, particularly if you are in a security leadership role. The top two ones are really important. So 87% of boards of directors and C-level executives say that they lack confidence in their security, the organization's level of cybersecurity. And that should really be troubling to us because we're working our butts off, right? And we can prove it, but is the problem that they don't understand what you're doing? Is the problem that you're not communicating it to them well? Or is there a vacuum? Nature of boards is a vacuum, and management fills a vacuum with fear and uncertainty and doubt. So you really do need to be thinking about why they lack that confidence. Now, the second number to me is even more troubling. 21% of organizations, their leaders say they are briefed on risk topics at every senior leadership meeting. Only 21%. So really think about this for a minute. Why is that number so low? Is it because you as security leaders, as a CISO or a CISO member, team member, is it that you're not invited up there because they don't care? Probably not. They say it's a high concern. They know the security's serious. So why are they not getting briefed on that? Are they not inviting you, quite frankly, because you're not good at it? Do you show up with a 6-inch binder with KRIs and KPIs and talk in acronyms and sort of talk over their heads to the point where they don't want you to come back because maybe you're making them feel a little stupid or something? It's unfair to us as security people. And I worked in security for 2 banks about 10 years here in Boston before I joined Verizon. So, I sat on the side of the table that you're at as a security operations person, having to go up and see the board and do these kind of briefings. And it is unfair to us that we have to learn, I guess we have to learn how to speak to them, right? And it would be lovely in a perfect world if the boards and the senior executives did know more about security and took more time to understand the rocket science that you guys have mastered. But they don't, to a certain degree. They have gotten smarter. Back in 2006, when I transitioned from internal communications at this bank to information security, first 6 months of the calendar year in 2006, every month we went to the board of directors at the bank, to the risk committee, and we presented sort of the status of the program. And it was always sort of a faith-based exercise because the chief risk officer really didn't get it, really didn't care. He's more of a money guy than a security guy. So he sort of nod politely and say thank you, and that's very interesting. And then something happened in the middle of 2006. It was a little thing, if you're from Boston area, or if you're you'll know it anyway, the TJX breach. TJX breach was a big tipping point for awareness of security issues. That's when the company, TJX, turned upside down, headlines, executive heads rolls. So the next month after the TJX briefing, we went up to the board with our security briefing, and it was a completely different dynamic. There was another guy in the room with the chief risk officer, and it was a consultant. And he was brought in to enhance the understanding of security among the board members, right? So all of a sudden it went from this sort of faith-based exercise to prove it, show me that you are actually moving the needle, as it were, in your security program. And that changed the way that we communicated to the board. And it's really fundamentally changed the way that you guys all do that. But still, the onus is on us to present information in a more business context and to understand the business that you're serving in the role that you're in. So think about, if your organization is not interacting in a structured manner regularly with senior level executives, you got to ask yourself why, and you got to work on that. So we talk about storytelling, and storytelling is like a thing now. You can actually get a degree in storytelling, which is sort of amazing to me. But when I talk about storytelling, I'm really just talking about, as I said earlier, strategic communication, right? Communication based on specific outcomes that you want. You want people to change their behavior. You want people to fund a program. You want people to at least get out of your way and not be a detraction from your program. So one thing to do, I want you to think about, is telling stories. And really, when I say stories, I mean just anecdotes. I'm talking about metaphors. I'm talking about the way that we present security information in a way that's interesting, that's consumable by business line people and others who don't really want to get into that rocket science. I want you to think about the way that you would go and talk about, like, like DDoS, right? So you would go and you would talk about the need for DDoS protections. And you can quickly find yourself talking all about the up and the down and the in and the out and the throughput and the bandwidth, and it can be very technical. Something like that can really sort of overwhelm when the eyes glaze over. So think about this way you present that in metaphors, right? You sort of talk about the attack, talk about the floodgates opening. Use the metaphors that people can picture in their heads. So they can sort of get their head around this stuff. One way to do this is Verizon has a lot of, call it thought leadership, I guess, for helping you tell stories. And I'd like to see a show of hands. I'm going to get a quick drink. I'd like to see a show of hands. Is anybody here familiar with the data breach investigation report? That's good number of hands, okay. So Verizon creates this thing called the Data Breach Investigation Report every year. And it's not, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes, about some of the material that's in there. But it's not the only thing that we've done. We created something last year called the Data Breach Digest. And all of these reports are free. They're available online. You can pull them down. And they're really helpful in that they're free of marketing material. It's really about security data and how to use that data to tell stories. So in the Data Breach Digest, we have a number of scenarios that are actually taken from our investigations. At Verizon, we do about 500 forensic investigations every year. We send teams out in the middle of the night to look into what happened during a breach and sort of put that fire out. If it was in the news, we were probably working on that. So we took from the files of that real stories, and we anonymized them. And in the Data Breach Digest, you can read like a 1 or 2 page sort of a narrative story about what happened at this company. And you can use that to really educate people in your organization about the reality of sort of this abstract stuff that you're talking about in security, to get them to understand it's not just a framework that somebody else is responsible for. In sales, too often salespeople come in and they use stories ripped from the headlines to create fear and uncertainty and doubt. You got to buy this thing so it doesn't happen to you. And shame on salespeople for doing that. They really should be talking about business outcomes. For you as security leaders, people who are influencing people in your organization, you should be cutting out things from the newspapers and using those not to instill fear, but to really instruct and to help people in the business lines, help people who own technology and processes but don't feel that they're responsible for the security, understand what can happen. And these stories can really resonate. Did anybody hear the story about the fish tank, the IoT connected fish tank? See some hands? This is about a year ago. This is a great headline. I think it was a casino in Las Vegas. They had connected their fish tank to the internet so they could monitor the water quality or something. And sure enough, the bad guys got into the network through the fish tank, right? And it sounds silly, but it's a representative example of what can go wrong if you don't have the proper controls in place. And to be able to pull a story like that out is very helpful to get people involved. Think about so I want to encourage you to go to the Verizon website, and you can download the Data Breach Digest for free, and think about how you might want to use it in your communications with people in your organization. A couple other things. When you think about security interactions with people, right? There's governance, and we talked a little bit about the board. You go to the board, or you don't go to the board, or you go to certain committees. And governance is important, and those sort of formal interactions are really important. But what I really want to encourage you to do as a security leader is to have lunch with people in the business lines, right? Think about your stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders in the organization? PR department, HR department, right? Business line managers, even just random employees, and get together with them in an informal way and talk about security and talk about the things that you do and the things that you are concerned about in the organization, and learn about what they do, and really try to humanize the role that you have, so people can understand that you're not just this department that says no, you're actually a business enabler, and that you want to help them do what they need to do, but do it in a secure way. So I really think it's important to not just rely on other people to do that communication, or just that quarterly meeting with the board or that monthly meeting with the audit committee, but to really get out there and talk to people. There was a story the other day about was it Riviera down in Florida, the ransomware. Did you guys hear this story? So there was a town in southern Florida that was hit with ransomware a few weeks ago, and the town had to pull together a town meeting, and they ended up spending, I think, $600,000 on Bitcoin, and because they wanted their data back. And you probably heard about Atlanta the year before. Atlanta was taken hostage with ransomware as well, and they decided not to pay the ransom, which was not a lot of money, and they ended up spending millions of dollars remediating it and getting the information back. See, those for me are examples of how you can start to engage stakeholders very strategically in your organization as a security person, with the objective of, say, talking about how we're going to deal with ransomware, but really to start to develop that relationship that goes beyond, like I said, just governance. So that's a really great opportunity to get people at the table, to sit down with the HR people or the PR people or the chief risk officer or other folks. We do this thing at Verizon. We do executive breach simulations, where we get together with a company, we bring in execs from different functions, and first we ask them, so who's responsible for this, and who's responsible for that, and who's responsible for this? And everybody raises their hand when things are good. They say, I'm responsible for that. And then we introduce a scenario where the you-know-what hits the fan. We say, now who's responsible for that? And everybody goes like this. They point at each other. They don't point at themselves anymore. And those sort of desktop exercises, if you're not doing them, you really should, not just to check the box and say, okay, this is a best practice, but really to use that almost as a Trojan horse to get people talking and to communicate strategically with them, from your security perspective. Think about the ransomware example. If you start with the story about Atlanta and tell them how they made a decision not to pay, and the ramifications were millions and millions and millions of dollars to remediate. You talk about this town in Florida, Riviera, I think it was, like I said, it was called, that decided to pay it, and it was $600,000. And then you have people from this town on national news screaming about, this is my tax money, I can't believe they did this. That can really start the ball rolling to figure out how you're going to do that as an organization. Think about when ransomware first became a big thing. There was a story about a hospital down in, I think it was Arkansas. And I'll never forget the headline. It was Krebs' headline. It was hospital declares state of emergency due to ransomware. And they had a press conference, and they were completely baffled, flummoxed. They didn't know what to say. They were standing there in the spotlight saying, we don't know what to do, we're paralyzed, and we're sorry. It was really like a worst case scenario, but a really good example of the need for organizations to sit down and do this. So think about using those stories to open up the conversation, and then to get to an agreement in your organization. Would we pay? I mean, does anybody here have a policy that you know of? Would your company pay or not pay? Or you scratch your head and say, we don't really know? We see a hand back there. So you guys have a firm decision? Not a lot of hands going up. And think about that nightmare. It's middle of the night and you get everybody together. And how do you even get Bitcoin? Is the first thing they're going to say, right? Do we want to pay it? So use that as a Trojan horse to get people talking. We have another report called the Insider Threat Report. The Insider Threat Report came out earlier this year. This is a really good report, again, for free. You download it. It's got nothing to do with products or anything like that. It has to do with intelligence that we've gathered over the years from the investigations that we do. And there's a lot of data in there about data breaches that were created by internal threat actors, talking about lazy employees or stupid employees, or the accidental release of information, the email going to the wrong place, and also people have been compromised, people who do these things intentionally, and even partners, right? Partners who bring risks to the organization. And the Insider Threat Report has a lot of data that you can use to sit down and advocate for, say, more funding or for more attention to insider threat in your organization. But it also has really good stories, and it's filled with these sort of anonymized narratives from but from actual investigations that we've done at Verizon that tell these stories about here's what happened. Here's when the employee sent the wrong email to the wrong person, or here's when a partner did something stupid. And the fact that it's a true story, I think can help you take sort of the data that shows how often it happens and why it happens and where it happens, and actually run your stakeholders through a scenario that might help them better understand that. We also created the mobile security index. So if you have any interest in mobile security, there's a lot of good data in that one as well, and again, stories in there. But I want to talk about the data breach investigation report. Excuse me for a minute. So I did see a show of hands earlier. The DBIR we publish every year, and it really is, from our perspective, we're told, we like to think it is a gold standard for this type of stuff. We've been doing it for about 12 years, and every year we collect information from partners all over the world. So this year we had 86 countries, law enforcement agencies, government agencies, agencies that had information about data breaches and data incidents. 73 different contributors. We created a language for the submission of this stuff. It's called the Veris framework. It's the vocabulary for event reporting and information sharing. Veris is a way to look at threat actors and the actions they take and the assets that they go after. And it's a way for organizations to submit information to us in a way that's easy for us to sort of compile and tell a common story in a common way. We looked at 41,000 incidents were things that actually required the attention of a security team and investigation more than just sort of cursory look. And of those 41,000 incidents, we looked at a subset of 2,000 confirmed data breaches. Most of those were exfiltration of data. Some of the breaches were also like outages, systems getting knocked down. So that's a pretty big set of data, and again, globally. And then, because we've been doing this for 10 years or more, that body of knowledge has grown over the years. So not only do we talk about what happened in the last 12 months, we can also draw more information and more inferences from patterns over last 2 years, last 5 years, last 10 years. So I want to talk a little bit about the value of this report and some of the stuff that's in the report. Just so if you're not familiar with it, go get it. You can come by the Verizon booth and grab a scan, a QR code, and you download it too. But it is for free. And so here's some of the big takeaways. For the last 5 years, we've noticed across all industries, doesn't matter which industry, the most common patterns continue to occur, attack patterns. So inside of incidents, you can see that it doesn't matter if you're an airline or a hospital or whatever, privilege misuse is one of the biggest issues, right? So what does that tell you? It tells you that we need to do a better job, managing our privileges and identity access management and such. Denial of service. I was surprised that it was that big, but that continues to be a real issue for organizations. So you have to make sure that you've got the pipe to mitigate that. Crimeware, lost, stolen assets. These are all these common things. So they sort of should influence what you are focusing on and what the stories that you're telling inside your organization. 98% of security incidents and 88% of breaches fall into these top 9 patterns. But when you start to break it down, I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit and then come back. You can actually use this for particular industries. So if you are in finance, you can use the data breach investigation report to have conversations about really what's happening in your industry, specific to your industry, not in the abstract, but really data-driven conversation. So if you look at financial and insurance industry, we saw just under 1,000 incidents. We saw 200 confirmed data breaches within those. And the top 3 patterns in this industry have been web applications, being sort of hijacked or exploited, privilege misuse again, and then miscellaneous errors, which is a pretty broad category. Everything from misdirected emails and faxes, and organizations that still use fax machines. So that was a big part of that. The threat actors are primarily external. So that tells you that in this industry, in most industries, honestly, you need to obviously have really good visibility into the threat actors coming from outside. But still, 36% of those were internal. And again, why were the internal people responsible for it? Was it malice, or was it laziness, or was it processes that are too cumbersome and that you have to work around? And that creates breaches. You have to look at the motivation. So obviously, who was that bank robber who said, when they said, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where we keep the money. Financial is the big motivating factor for financial and insurance breaches. So you can take this sort of data and you can, again, start conversations, and you can sort of marry it to some of the stories that are in the Data Breach Digest if you don't have your own stories, or if you don't have your own newspaper pile of clippings, to marry the data with the stories and help people make it real for them. And fundamentally, that's what you want to do, particularly at the board level. DBIR, as I said, breaks it up by industry. So it does it by retail, it does it by automotive, it does it by manufacturing. For healthcare, this is different, see? Now, 466 incidents, and the biggest threat actors in this industry are internal. So if you're a healthcare organization and the powers that be are really concerned about being attacked from the outside, as well they should be, because 42% of the attacks come from the outside. But if they say, oh, our people are great, we don't really need to put half of our budget toward insider threat, you can use this data to tell the story, and you can use the insider threat report that we put together to illustrate this data and tell a story about how these problems manifest themselves when people go bad. Look at this number. 83% of the motivating factor in healthcare data breaches is financial. Healthcare information is like the most monetizable information there is if you steal it for fraud, identity theft, but really for insurance fraud. But I love this one. 6% is for fun. Right? So, I'm bored. I want to see if my mother-in-law is still sick. I want to see if my ex-boyfriend still has that thing that we don't like to talk about. So they go into health records and we look stuff up. That's the fun stuff, right? Or who's the latest celebrity in rehab. And it's shocking how often that happens. And some of it's even for grudge, as you can see. So, so that tells you what do we need to do. Do we have proper access controls? Do we have the right reporting? Do we have policies in place to make sure people understand that's a HIPAA violation, that's a fireable offense, right? Again, the threat actors, in this industry, it's the only one where internal threat actors are the highest. So the DBIR, the Data Breach Investigation Report, breaks this stuff down pretty much by I think about 10 or 11 different industries, and that can be very helpful. But again, when you marry it to the Data Breach Digest and the Insider Threat Report, now you've got data and stories that you can use to tell some other stories. Let me go back. I want to talk a little bit about metaphors and the way that we present security information and talk about this. So how many times have you guys been hit on by a vendor who comes in and the presentation material is that hackneyed stuff? It's the guy in the hoodie, and it's the little matrix going by. The imagery that too many security vendors use to tell this story. And they use the same old tired metaphors, right? The keys to the castle, the crown jewels. How many times have you seen literally the graphic of a castle, right? To show security concepts. It's sort of insulting to you and to us as security professionals when folks come in to do that. But when you are trying to educate internal stakeholders who are not IT, experts, the temptation is to just do that as well. And there's a real danger of either talking over or talking down to them, and it's a real balancing act. So I just want to acknowledge, and I was saying earlier, that it is unfair to us that we have to learn the language of business, and we have to think about security in terms of business outcomes and ROI. But we have an obligation to be mindful of the fact too that it's a real balancing act of not speaking down to people, and also not talking over their heads, not falling into the acronyms that we know so well, and assuming that they know what we're talking about. So that's where things like metaphors come in, right? There's some data in the Data Breach Digest that talks about the number of steps it has taken people to exfiltrate data, to steal information. And the number of steps in the most successful ones has gone down. You're talking like less than 5 steps. They get in, they get the stuff, they get out. And that tells you that you need to accelerate detection. You need to really speed up the ability to find these people and to get them off your network and to close those holes. And to advocate for more funding or for redistribution of resources so you can accelerate that detection and response. You can use this sort of data that says they are getting very fast. And there's also data in the DBIR that talks about how long it takes organizations to discover that there's been a breach. And there's a huge delta between when the bad guys get in and when organizations find this stuff. So it can be weeks, it can be months. Some organizations it's more than a year. And the DBIR talks about how some organizations get they get notified by outsiders as opposed to finding it themselves, which is really embarrassing when a customer tells you that you've been breached. So to talk to the powers that be about the need to accelerate this detection, you could bring in this and say it's proven that they move this fast. But how do you translate that into a story that instead of talking about, well, we need this technology, this technology, this technology, I would lead with what they do in the data breach investigation report this year. There's a story in there, it's sort of a sidebar, and it talks about golf. And it's with this graphic. And it talks about how, as security people, we're like the game warden, not the game warden, the golf warden, the guy who's in charge of the golf course. And we try to make it challenging for the players. So what do? We put in sand traps, we put in water hazards, right? We cut the grass to a certain height, and we move the pin around every now and then. And we change it up, so we try and make it a little challenging. The bad guys are like really evil golfers. They don't care about the rules. They will pick up the ball and they will throw it. They will kick it out of the woods. They will pretend that it didn't go in the water. The bad guys don't play by the same rules that we play by. So to talk about how we need more sand traps. We need thicker grass. We need longer greens. Metaphors sometimes sound silly, but it's a way to break the ice, and it's a way to get people to, again, to start to put themselves into the story that you're trying to get them to understand. And I was saying earlier, try to get past some of those cliches. Try and get past some of those old stuff with the keys to the castle and that, and make up your own metaphors. I was talking to a customer the other day about, I was just telling him, like, I really understand how busy they are, and I don't know where it came from, but I was like, just trying to be a CISO these days is like trying to eat a sandwich at the beach, and you're just constantly being attacked by seagulls. And I was talking about how, you're trying to do this, and in comes the auditor, and then in comes the board, and then in comes a regulator, and then in comes another vendor, then comes another vendor, and all of a sudden you look up and it's 20 years later and you haven't even eaten your sandwich yet because you've been attacked all day. And that really resonated with him because, he felt some empathy there. But I don't know where that one came from. It sort of just plucked that. I think it was at the beach that weekend. So think about in your daily life, just the things that you hear about, the things that resonate with you. You can borrow other people's stories, borrow other people's anecdotes or metaphors, sort of make them your own. But try and be mindful that you are communicating for a specific reason. You want to, again, change behaviors. I wanted to go back to this. One of the biggest challenges that we have is sort of the best practice fatigue, is going in and talking about all the things that we have to do in the security program. With data now, you can actually get your stakeholders to understand what's more likely and what's more probable, right? And that's really the risk conversation. So you don't have to have, play whack-a-mole all the time and have a program for every potential. You can now use the data, and again, in the DBIR, we have that data to help you understand what's more probable in your industry. Now, that's a great way to frame conversations and to get yourselves invited into the risk conversations in organizations. So now you're not just looking at security, but now you're part of the whole conversation about risk appetite, right, and risk tolerance. So I want you to go to our website and grab these reports and start using them. So I'm going to wrap up in a minute. I know it's a little bit early, but a good storyteller knows when to stop. But I just wanted to sort of give you one last piece of insight from the DBIR. Some of the other things that we found, just so you know. External threat actors are still the primary force behind so many of these attacks. If anybody here works in finance, the chip and pin stuff has really gotten under control. But now what we're seeing is the bad guys are adapting to the cloud. So as you move your payment systems online and move your payment systems to the cloud, the bad guys realize that, well, the ATM theft and the skimming doesn't work anymore because of the chip and pin. But as you transform your organizations and your security program has to transform along with it to the cloud, because the bad guys are already figuring out how to exploit privileges and web applications. Financially motivated attacks, again, are the biggest. And this year we saw a huge increase in social attacks on executives. So C-level people we're the victims of like, well, you get an email that says it's from the CFO. I'm at the beach. I need you to send $50,000 by wire to this guy by Friday because we're doing a big deal and it's very secret and you can't reach me because I'm at the beach. And it looks like it's from them, you know, the whole email spoofing thing. People fall for this. It sounds silly, right? But it actually works, and it works a lot. We saw a huge spike in that this year in the data. So that, again, speaks to the need to do more than just the annual training, you know, where you check the box and you say, okay, we got 100% of our people trained. Did it actually mean anything? So to talk about the processes that you have in your organization, to dive into, you know, who has the authority to send wires and things like that, you have the data and these stories that you can use to get people to understand that. So for the fundamental takeaway for me is as a storyteller, as a person who has an opportunity and an obligation to communicate with stakeholders, not just the board, not just the and not just the higher ups, but again the business line managers and VPs and such who own processes that can bring risk to the organization, that you have an opportunity to become an ally to them. If you tell good stories, bring good data, you're going to start to become a trusted advisor. They're going to appreciate your counsel as opposed to your coming in there and just telling them what to do, right? The saying goes, you know, if you use data, you can win people's minds, but if you tell stories, you can win people's hearts. So I just want to encourage you to think about those two things as a combination as you're reaching out to folks. So we're going to be at the Verizon booth. We're actually, we have a tool that we just created called the Verizon Risk Report. It's not a report, it's actually a service. And it's sort of built on this idea, which is we take a tremendous amount of data around your security posture, and we present it in a way, it's not about data visualization, but it's about being able to use the data, again, to tell stories to management. So this is not a SIM tool that we built, but it's a tool that literally in plain language says things like, here's what's helping, here's what's hurting. And the customers who've seen this really appreciate that because they say, this is a great tool for me, literally, to be able to go to my stakeholders, go to my board, and talk to them in a way that resonates with them, that they can understand, instead of going there with, again, that big pile of KPIs and KRIs. So I want to thank you for listening. Hopefully you got some value out of this, a little bit outside the box, less technical and more soft skill stuff, but it's not a soft skill, it's hard. What did Kennedy say? We do these things because they're hard, right? So anyway. So celebrate the moon thing, come by and see us, and remember, it's not just you're not just technologists, you're communications people as well. Okay, thank you. Thank you.